Homeless black teen saves wealthy executive from suicide. Years later, their lives take an unbelievable turn when the pale glow of streetlights cast long shadows across the deserted financial district as Marcus Johnson trudged along the sidewalk, his threadbare sneakers scuffing against the concrete. At just 17, the weight of the world seemed to rest upon his slender shoulders. His stomach growled, painful reminder that it had been days since his last proper meal. Marcus pulled his tattered jacket tighter around his frame, trying to ward off the chill that had settled over the city. The towering skyscrapers loomed above him, their gleaming facades a stark contrast to his own circumstance. He'd been on the streets for nearly a year now, ever since his grandmother, his last living relative, had passed away. The foster system had failed him, and he'd slipped through the cracks, becoming just another faceless statistic in a city that seemed to have forgotten him. As he rounded a corner, Marcus's gaze was drawn upward by a flicker of movement. High above the street, a solitary figure stood precariously on the ledge of one of the towering office buildings. Even from this distance, Marcus could see the man's expensive suit, a detail that seemed incongruous with his dangerous position. For a moment, Marcus hesitated. It wasn't his problem, he told himself. He had his own struggles to deal with, but something, a mix of curiosity and an ingrained sense of right and wrong that even his hardships couldn't extinguish, propelled him forward. The lobby of the building was deserted at this late hour, the security guard's desk empty. Marcus slipped inside, his heart pounding as he made his way to the bank of elevators. He jabbed at the button for the top floor, praying that the card reader wouldn't stop him. To his surprise and relief, the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. As the elevator ascended, Marcus's mind raced. What was he doing? He was just a homeless kid. What could he possibly do to help? But the image of that lonely figure on the ledge haunted him. He had to try. The elevator doors opened onto a plush, carpeted hallway. Marcus followed the signs to the roof access, his footsteps muffled by the thick pile. The door to the roof was ajar, cool breeze whistling through the gap. Taking a deep breath, Marcus stepped out into the night air. The man on the ledge didn't turn as Marcus approached. He was older than Marcus had first thought, maybe in his late 50s, with silver threading through his dark hair. His shoulders were hunched, his gaze fixed on the dizzying drop before him. "Hey," Marcus called out softly, his voice barely audible over the wind. "You okay, mister?" The man's head snapped around, his eyes wide with surprise and something else. "Fear? Anger? Who are you?" he demanded. "How did you get up here?" Marcus held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm nobody," said. I saw you from the street. I thought maybe you could use someone to talk to." The man's laugh was bitter, devoid of any humor. "Talk? What good would talking do? Do you have any idea who I am, what I've done?" Marcus shook his head. "No, sir. I don't know anything about you, but I know what it's like to feel like there's no way out." Something in his voice must have reached the man, because his rigid posture softened slightly. "You're just a kid," he said, his tone softer now. "What could you possibly know about feeling trapped?" Marcus took a cautious step closer. "I've been on the streets for almost a year," he said. "Before that, I bounced around the foster system after my grandma died. I've thought about giving up more times than I can count, but I'm still here." The man was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to the cityscape spread out before them. "My name is Richard Hartley," he said finally. "I'm the CEO of Hartley Investments, or I was until about 6 hours ago when the board voted to remove me." Marcus nodded, even though Richard wasn't looking at him. "That sounds rough," he said, "but is it worth all this?" Richard's shoulders slumped. "You don't understand. It's not just about losing my job. I've done things, made choices that I can't take back. People are going to get hurt because of me." "Maybe," Marcus said, "but standing out here on this ledge, that's a choice too, and it's one you can still change." Richard turned to face him fully for the first time. In the dim light, Marcus could see the tears glistening in the older man's eyes. "Why do you care? You don't even know me." Marcus shrugged. "Because somebody should," he said simply. "And right now, I'm the only one here." For what felt like an eternity, the two of them stood there, the wind whipping around them. Then, slowly, Richard extended his hand, Marcus reached out and grasped it firmly, helping the older man step down from the ledge. As soon as his feet touched the roof, Richard's legs seemed to give out. He sank to his knees, his body racked with sobs. Marcus knelt beside him, awkwardly patting his shoulder. "It's okay," Marcus murmured. "You're gonna be okay." After a few minutes, Richard's sobs subsided. He looked up at Marcus, his eyes red-rimmed, clearer now. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. I don't know what I was thinking." Marcus helped him to his feet. "Let's get you inside, Mr. Hartley. It's cold out here." As they made their way back to the elevator, Richard studied Marcus more closely. "What's your name, son?" "Marcus," he replied. "Marcus Johnson." Richard nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Well, Marcus Johnson, I think you might have just saved my life. I'm not sure how I can ever repay you for that." Marcus shrugged uncomfortably. "You don't owe me anything, sir. I'm just glad you're okay." But as the elevator descended, carrying them back down to the lobby, neither of them could have predicted how this chance encounter would change both of their lives forever. In the coming days, weeks, and months, the unlikely bond forged between a homeless black teenager and a wealthy white executive would be tested in ways neither could have imagined. Their journey together would challenge their assumptions, push them to confront their own demons, and ultimately lead them both on a path of redemption and hope. As they stepped out into the quiet street, first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the eastern sky. For Marcus and Richard, it was more than just the start of a new day. It was the beginning of a new chapter in both their lives, one that would have far-reaching consequences neither of them could yet foresee. Following morning, Marcus awoke to the familiar discomfort, the hard bench he'd claimed as his bed for the night. As he blinked away the remnants of sleep, the events of the previous evening came rushing back to him. Had it all been a dream? Man on the ledge, the heart-wrenching conversation, the moment of connection, it all seemed surreal in the harsh light of day. Marcus stretched, wincing as his joints popped in protest. He was gathering his meager possessions when a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The back window rolled down, revealing a face he recognized immediately. Richard Hartley. "Marcus?" Richard called out, his voice carrying a mix of relief and uncertainty. "I'm glad I found you. I hoped we could talk." Hesitantly, Marcus approached the car. Richard opened the door, gesturing for him to get in. For a moment, Marcus wavered. His instincts, owned by months on the streets, warned him to be cautious. But something in Richard's eyes, vulnerability that hadn't been there the night before, made him decide to take the risk. As Marcus slid into the plush leather seat, he was acutely aware of how out of place he looked and felt. Richard seemed to sense his discomfort and tried to put him at ease. "I want to thank you again for last night," Richard began. I wasn't in my right mind. If you hadn't shown up when you did." Marcus nodded, unsure of what to say. "I'm just glad you're okay, Mr. Hartley." Richard's lips quirked in a small smile. "Please, call me Richard. After what we went through together, I think we can dispense with formalities." He paused, his expression growing serious. "Marcus, I owe you my life, and I'd like to help you, if you'll let me." Marcus tensed, his defenses rising. "I don't need charity," he said, perhaps more sharply than he'd intended. Richard held up his hands in a placating gesture. "It's not charity, Marcus. It's an opportunity, a chance to turn things around for both of us." As the car wound its way through the city streets, Richard began to explain. He'd spent a sleepless night reflecting on his life, on the choices that had led him to that ledge. He'd realized that in his relentless pursuit of success and wealth, he'd lost sight of what truly mattered. "I've done things I'm not proud of," Richard admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "I've hurt people, made decisions that benefited me at the expense of others. But last night, when you reached out to help a complete stranger, it reminded me of the person I used to be, person I want to be again." Marcus listened, trying to reconcile this vulnerable, introspective man with the broken figure he'd encountered on the rooftop. Richard continued, "I've decided to make some changes in my life, to try and make amends for my past mistakes, and I'd like you to be a part of that, if you're willing." "What exactly are you proposing?" Marcus asked cautiously. Richard took a deep breath. "I'd like to offer you a job, Marcus, an internship at my company. You'd have a steady income, place to live, and the opportunity to learn about the business world. In return, I'm hoping you can help me reconnect with the values I've lost sight of. Marcus's head spun. Seemed too good to be true, and his street-honed skepticism flared. Why me? You don't even know me. Richard's gaze was steady as he replied, because you showed compassion when you had every reason not to. Because you saw value in a life that I was ready to throw away. I think we could learn a lot from each other, Marcus. As the car pulled up in front of a towering office building, Marcus found himself at a crossroads. On one hand, this could be the chance he'd been waiting for, an opportunity to escape the streets and build a better life. On the other, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into a world he didn't understand, one that could swallow him whole if he wasn't careful. Richard seemed to sense his hesitation. You don't have to decide right now, he said gently. Take some time to think about it. Here's my card. If you decide you're interested, or if you just need someone to talk to, call me anytime. Marcus took the card, running his thumb over the embossed lettering. As he stepped out of the car, he felt as though he was standing on the edge of something monumental, much like Richard had been on that ledge the night before. Thank you, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll think about it. Richard nodded, a mix of hope and understanding in his eyes. As the car pulled away, Marcus stood on the sidewalk, business card clutched in his hand, feeling as though his world had been turned upside down for the second time in less than 24 hours. Over the next few days, Marcus found himself unable to stop thinking about Richard's offer. He'd walk past the gleaming office buildings, imagining what it would be like to work in one of them. He'd see families in the park, laughing and carefree, and wonder if he could ever have that kind of stability. But doubt gnawed at him too. What if he wasn't good enough? What if he couldn't adapt to that world? And what if Richard's offer wasn't as altruistic as it seemed? It was on the 5th day after their meeting that Marcus's decision was made for him. Cold snap had hit the city, and he'd been unable to find a warm place to sleep. Shivering and desperate, he found himself dialing the number on Richard's card from a payphone. Richard answered on the second ring. Marcus, is everything all right? Marcus swallowed his pride. I think I'd like to take you up on that offer if it's still open. There was a pause, and for a heart-stopping moment, Marcus feared he'd waited too long. But then Richard's voice came through the line, warm and relieved. Of course it is. Where are you? I'll come get you right away. As Marcus gave his location, he felt a mix of anticipation and trepidation. He was about to step into a new world, one that was as foreign to him as the streets had once been. But as he thought back to that night on the rooftop, he realized that sometimes the biggest changes in life come from the most unexpected places. An hour later, as Marcus sat in Richard's office, wrapped in a warm blanket and sipping hot coffee, he knew that his life was about to change dramatically. What he didn't know was that this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself, about Richard, and about the world they lived in. As Richard began to outline the details of Marcus's new position and living arrangements, neither of them could have predicted the obstacles they would face, bonds they would forge, or the profound impact they would have on each other's lives. The homeless teen and the wealthy executive were about to embark on a journey of redemption, growth, and unexpected kinship that would change them both forever. First rays of sunlight crept through the curtains of Marcus's new apartment, rousing him from a deep sleep. For a moment, he lay still, disoriented by the soft mattress and warm blankets, luxuries he'd almost forgotten existed. It had been 2 weeks since he'd accepted Richard's offer, and sometimes he still couldn't believe the turn his life had taken. As he went through his morning routine, a hot shower, clean clothes, a nutritious breakfast, Marcus reflected on the whirlwind of changes. Richard had set him up in a small but comfortable apartment not far from the Hartley Investments office. He'd been given new clothes, a laptop, and a monthly stipend that felt like a fortune compared to his life on the streets. But the biggest change was the internship itself. Marcus had been thrust into a world of spreadsheets, meetings, and corporate jargon that made his head spin. Despite his initial fears, he found himself adapting quickly. his street-honed instincts translating surprisingly well to the cutthroat world of finance. As Marcus made his way to the office, couldn't help but notice the looks he received from some of his coworkers. While many had been welcoming, others viewed him with suspicion or outright disdain. He knew the rumors that circulated. He was Richard's charity case, or worse, that there was something unsavory about their relationship. Marcus did his best to ignore the whispers, focusing instead on proving himself through hard work and dedication. Richard, true to his word, had taken Marcus under his wing. Their days were filled with intense mentoring sessions, where Richard not only taught Marcus about business, but also opened up about his own past mistakes and the cutthroat decisions that had led him to that fateful night on the ledge. As Marcus entered Richard's office for their morning meeting, he found the older man poring over a stack of documents, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Good morning, Richard," Marcus said, setting down 2 cups of coffee. He'd quickly learned Richard's preferred brew. Richard looked up, a tired smile crossing his face. "Morning, Marcus. Thank you for the coffee. We've got a challenging day ahead of us." Marcus took a seat, his curiosity piqued. "What's going on?" Richard sighed, pushing the documents across the desk. "Remember that merger I told you about? The one that was in the works before that night?" Marcus nodded, and Richard continued. "Well, it's moving forward, and I've just discovered some discrepancies in the financials that could spell trouble for a lot of people." As Richard explained the situation, Marcus felt a knot forming in his stomach. The merger, if it went through as planned, would result in thousands of job losses, mostly affecting working-class families. Moreover, there were indications of financial manipulation that bordered on fraud. "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Richard ran a hand through his silver hair, looking every bit his age. "That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? If I bring this to light, it could tank the deal. The board would have my head. But if I don't..." Marcus finished the thought for him. "A lot of innocent people get hurt." The two sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the decision hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Marcus spoke up. "You know, when I was on the streets, I saw a lot of people do bad things. Sometimes it was to survive, sometimes it was just because they could. But the ones who always stuck with me were the ones who chose to do the right thing, even when it cost them everything." Richard looked at Marcus, a mix of pride and sadness in his eyes. "When did you get so wise, kid?" Marcus shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "I had a good teacher." Over the next few days, Marcus watched as Richard wrestled with his conscience. He saw the toll it took on the older man, the sleepless nights, the weight of responsibility, but he also saw something else emerging, a strength and integrity that had been buried beneath years of corporate maneuvering. When Richard finally made his decision to blow the whistle on the fraudulent aspects of the merger, Marcus stood by his side. The fallout was immediate and severe. The board was furious, shareholders panicked, and Richard found himself once again fighting for his professional life. But amidst the chaos, something unexpected happened. As news of Richard's stance spread, support began to pour in from unexpected quarters. Employees whose jobs would have been lost in the merger rallied behind him. Ethical investors praised his integrity. And slowly, the tide of public opinion began to turn. For Marcus, watching this transformation was both inspiring and challenging. He found himself thrust into the spotlight alongside Richard, his own background scrutinized and questioned. There were difficult moments, times when the pressure seemed overwhelming. It's when he longed for the simplicity of his old life. There were moments of triumph, too. Day Richard testified before a congressional committee, exposing the wider implications of the fraudulent practices they'd uncovered. The afternoon they spent volunteering at a local community center, where Marcus saw firsthand the impact their actions had on real people's lives. As weeks turned into months, Marcus realized that he was changing too. The street-smart kid was evolving into a confident young man with a keen business acumen and a strong moral compass. He began to see his past not as a burden to be ashamed of, but as a unique perspective that gave him insight others lacked. One evening, as they sat in Richard's office long after most employees had gone home, Marcus finally asked the question that had been on his mind for months. "Richard," he began hesitantly, "you ever regret it? Bringing me into all this?" Richard looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Marcus, the night you found me on that ledge, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. But you showed me that there was still good in the world, still reasons to keep fighting." He paused, his eyes misting slightly. "You didn't just save my life that night. You gave me a chance to redeem it. And for that, I'll always be grateful." As Marcus absorbed these words, he felt a surge of emotion. He realized that somewhere along the way, his relationship with Richard had evolved from mentor and protege to something deeper, a bond of mutual respect, trust, and genuine affection. But even as they shared this moment of connection, neither Marcus nor Richard could have anticipated the challenges still lay ahead. Forces they had set in motion, far-reaching, and there were powerful people who weren't happy with the new direction Hartley Investments was taking. As they left the office that night, stepping out into the cool evening air, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that their journey together was far from over. The lessons of the past months had prepared them for something bigger, something that would test their newfound strength and integrity to the limit. Little did they know, the true test of their bond and their principles was just around the corner, waiting to shake the very foundations of the world they had built together. The city skyline glittered in the distance as Marcus stood at the window of his office, lost in thought. It had been almost a year since that fateful night on the rooftop, and the changes in his life still sometimes left him breathless. From a homeless teen to a rising star at Hartley Investments, his journey had been nothing short of extraordinary. But with success came new challenges. The whispers that had once been confined to office gossip had grown into a cacophony of media speculation. Marcus Johnson, the young protege of Richard Hartley, was now a figure of public interest. His rags to riches story had captured the imagination of the press, and not all of the attention was positive. A soft knock at the door pulled Marcus from his reverie. Richard entered, his face etched with concern. "Have you seen this?" Richard asked, handing Marcus a tablet open to a news article. Marcus skimmed the headline and felt his heart sink. "Hartley Investments accused of exploiting homeless youth," it screamed in bold letters. The article went on to suggest that Marcus's position at the company was nothing more than a publicity stunt, a cynical attempt to distract from the company's ongoing legal trouble. "It's not true," Marcus said, his voice tight with anger and hurt. "They don't know anything about us, about what we've been through together." Richard placed a comforting hand on Marcus's shoulder. "I know, son, but perception is reality in this world. We need to address this head-on." Over the next few weeks, Marcus and Richard found themselves embroiled in a media firestorm. Every aspect of their relationship was scrutinized, every decision questioned. The pressure began to take its toll on both of them. Marcus struggled with feelings of guilt and inadequacy. Had he really earned his position, or was he just a token, as the critics claimed? The doubt gnawed at him, threatening to undo all the progress he'd made. Richard, for his part, faced renewed calls for his resignation. The board, already unhappy with his ethical stance on the merger, saw the controversy surrounding Marcus as the last straw. It was during this tumultuous time that Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Late one night, unable to sleep, he began to write. He poured out his story, the pain of losing his grandmother, the harsh realities of life on the streets, the moment of connection on that rooftop, and the challenging journey of the past year. When he showed the manuscript to Richard, the older man read it in silence, tears glistening in his eyes. "This is it, Marcus," he said finally. "This is how we fight back, with the truth." With Richard's encouragement, Marcus decided to publish his story. It was a risk, laying bare his vulnerabilities for the world to see, but it felt right. As the book hit the shelves, something remarkable began to happen. People responded to Marcus's raw honesty, the unvarnished truth of his experiences. The narrative began to shift. What had been seen as exploitation was now recognized as a genuine story of redemption. Not just for Marcus, for Richard as well. The book became a catalyst for a larger conversation about second chances, about the potential that exists in every person, no matter their background. As public opinion swung in their favor, Marcus and Richard seized the opportunity to effect real change. They launched a foundation dedicated to helping homeless youth, using Marcus's experiences to shape programs that addressed the real needs of kids on the street. But their greatest challenge was yet to come. As the foundation's work gained traction, it began to uncover systemic issues that went far beyond individual stories of homelessness. Marcus and Richard found themselves facing off against entrenched interests, corrupt officials, unscrupulous real estate developers, and others who profited from the status quo. The fight took them from the boardroom to the halls of government. Marcus, once so unsure of himself in the corporate world, now found himself testifying before city councils and state legislatures. His unique perspective, bridging the worlds of high finance and street-level reality, proved invaluable. Richard, for his part, leveraged his considerable influence and resources to support their cause. He faced down old business associates, risking personal relationships and financial interests in pursuit of a greater good. Their partnership deepened through these trials. Richard, who had once seen Marcus as someone to mentor, now found himself learning from the younger man's courage and conviction. Marcus, in turn, drew strength from Richard's unwavering support and guidance. As their work gained momentum, they began to see real change happening. Policies were reformed, new housing initiatives were launched, and most importantly, lives were being transformed. The Foundation's programs were giving kids like Marcus had been a genuine shot at a better life. One crisp autumn evening, almost 2 years to the day since their first encounter, Marcus and Richard stood together on the rooftop where it had all begun. The city spread out before them, tapestry of lights and shadows, challenges and possibilities. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" Marcus asked, his voice soft with wonder. Richard shook his head, a smile playing on his lips. "Not in my wildest dreams. You know, when I was standing on that ledge, I thought I had nothing left to give the world. But you showed me that it's never too late to make a difference." Marcus nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. "And you showed me that my past didn't have to define my future, that I could be more than just another statistic." As they stood there, cool breeze ruffling their hair, both men felt a profound sense of gratitude. Their journey had been far from easy, marked by setbacks and struggles. Through it all, they had found in each other not just a partner, but a family. Transformation they had undergone, from a suicidal executive and a homeless teen, beacons of hope and change, was a testament to the power of compassion, second chances, and the unbreakable bond that can form between two people from vastly different worlds. As the lights of the city twinkled below them, Marcus and Richard knew that their work was far from over. There were still battles to be fought, lives to be changed. But together, they felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Future, once so bleak for both of them, now shimmered with possibility. And as they turned to leave the rooftop, they did so not as mentor and protege, not as savior and saved, but as equal. Two men united in their commitment to making the world a little bit better, one life at a time. The grand ballroom of the Hartley Foundation headquarters buzzed with excitement. Hundreds of people from all walks of life, corporate executives in tailored suits, social workers in casual attire, and former street kids in their Sunday best, mingled together, united by a common purpose. At the center of it all stood Marcus Johnson, now 22 years old. Posture confident, but his eyes still holding that hint of wonder at the path his life had taken. Beside him, Richard Hartley beamed with pride, silver hair gleaming under the chandeliers. It was the 5th anniversary of the Hartley Foundation, and they were gathered to celebrate not just their achievements, but to launch their most ambitious initiative yet. Marcus stepped up to the podium, the room falling silent as he began to speak. 5 years ago, I was a homeless kid with no hope and no future. Today, I stand before you as living proof that change is possible, that second chances can transform lives. His voice, once uncertain, now rang with conviction. But my story is just one of many. Today, we're here to ensure that it becomes one of thousands. As Marcus outlined the Foundation's new nationwide program, comprehensive approach to youth homelessness that combined housing, education, job training, and mental health support, Richard watched from the side, his heart swelling with emotion. The journey to this moment had not been easy. There had been setbacks along the way, funding challenges, political opposition, and personal struggles, as both Marcus and Richard grappled with the weight of their responsibilities. There was the time Marcus, overwhelmed by the pressure, had briefly relapsed into old habits, disappearing for days and leaving Richard frantic with worry. It was a harsh reminder of the deep-seated trauma that Marcus still carried, and it led to a renewed commitment to mental health support in all of their programs. For Richard, the challenges had come in the form of old business associates turning their backs on him, of learning to navigate a world where his wealth and influence were used for social good rather than personal gain. He had to confront his own prejudices and blind spots, guided by Marcus's insights and experiences. But through it all, their bond had only grown stronger. They had become more than mentor and protege, more than friends even. They were family in every sense that mattered. As Marcus concluded his speech to thunderous applause, Richard joined him on stage. Together, they unveiled the cornerstone of their new initiative, the Marcus Johnson Scholarship, fully funded program that would provide education and support to homeless youth across the country. The crowd erupted in cheers. But for Marcus, the most meaningful reaction came from a small group seated near the front. They were the first graduates of the Foundation's pilot program, young men and women who, like Marcus, had once been on the streets, but were now on paths to bright futures. Their eyes shone with a mixture of gratitude and determination, a look Marcus recognized all too well. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Marcus and Richard found a quiet moment alone on the balcony overlooking the city. "You know," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion, "when I took you in, I thought I was the one doing the saving. I never imagined how much you would end up saving me." Marcus smiled, remembering the broken man he'd encountered on that rooftop 5 years ago. "I think we saved each other," he said softly. Richard nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I have something for you," he said, handing it to Marcus. Curious, Marcus opened it. Inside was a legal document. As he read it, his eyes widened in shock. "Adoption papers?" he whispered, looking up at Richard in disbelief. Richard's eyes were moist as he spoke. "I know you're an adult now, and you certainly don't need a legal guardian, but I wanted to make official what we've both known for a long time. You're my son, Marcus, in every way that matters." For a moment, Marcus couldn't speak. The lost, lonely boy who had spent so many years feeling unwanted and unloved was still a part of him. And that boy was overwhelmed by this ultimate gesture of acceptance and love. Finally, he managed to choke out, "I'd be honored, Dad." As they embraced, both men felt the weight of their shared journey, pain, the struggles, the triumphs. But more than that, they felt the promise of the future they would continue to build together. From the ballroom came the sound of laughter and celebration, a reminder of the lives they had touched and the work still to be done. Marcus and Richard turned to rejoin the party, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They had come so far from that night on the rooftop. A homeless teen and a suicidal executive, two lost souls who had found in each other not just salvation, but a purpose greater than themselves. Their story was a testament to the power of compassion, to the transformative nature of love and acceptance, and to the idea that it's never too late for a new beginning. As they walked back into the ballroom, side by side, father and son in every way that mattered, they carried with them the hope of all those whose lives they had touched and would continue to touch. Their journey was far from over. Together, they were ready for whatever the future might hold. In the end, the story of Marcus Johnson and Richard Hartley was more than just a tale of personal redemption. It was a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, a single act of kindness can spark a chain reaction that changes not just two lives, but the very fabric of society itself. And as the night wore on, as plans were made and dreams were shared, one thing became clear: the greatest chapters of their story were still yet to be written.